My mother-in-law tried to drug me at dinner in Franklin, Tennessee. I will tell you about what I did later, but now a little bit about how it all started. My name is Julian Mercer. I'm 32 years old. What I remember most was the light in the dining room. Warm, soft, deceptive. It made everything look sweeter than it really was. My wife, Erin, sat next to me and laughed politely at one of her mother's well-honed anecdotes, which she told over and over again as if trying out for a role in her own life. Her father, Marvin, was checking his watch for the third time, pretending not to be bored. And Diane, my mother-in-law, was flitting around like a hostess on autopilot, all pearls and fake kindness. Then came the sangria. She said it like a joke, but her eyes didn't match her tone. Special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law. Her hand trembled just slightly as she set the glass in front of me, and it wasn't from age. Diane's hands never trembled unless something was wrong. I thanked her. Smiled, even. And then, without hesitation, I picked up the glass and walked it over to Marvin. Thought you'd want the first taste, I said, easy as anything, and handed it off to the man who once told me that real men don't work in education. That's right, I'm a high school English teacher. Not a professor, not a writer, not someone they brag about to neighbors. Just a guy who loves poetry, kids who need second chances, and making sure my students leave with more than they came with. I make enough to pay the bills and give Erin the life she said she wanted. But not enough, apparently, for her mother to consider me real. I poured myself a glass of water and sat back down like I hadn't just made a decision that would split time in two. 45 minutes later, Marvin was pale and sweating, excusing himself with a shaking hand and a sound in his throat like something was trying to climb out. Diane froze. Her fingers curled tight around her wine glass. Her face didn't twist or scream. She just blinked. Once. Twice. And when her eyes met mine, it was like she saw me for the first time, not as a burden or a joke, but as a problem. Because I knew. And she knew that I knew. I sat there, stone still, while Marvin retched in the downstairs bathroom. Erin rushed to help. Diane followed with a cloth and a lie about bad shrimp. And God help me, I just took a bite of cake and chewed slowly. Cold. Quiet. A man who finally saw the wires behind the smile. That was 3 weeks ago. And I haven't said a word to Erin about it. Yet. I didn't sleep much that night. Erin kept asking what I thought had made her dad sick. Maybe the pork? She offered. Maybe the sangria didn't mix well with his meds? I just nodded. Told her it was probably nothing. People get sick. Sometimes things just don't sit right. But I was lying. Not just to her, but to myself too. Because it wasn't nothing. It wasn't the pork or his meds or any of the dozen excuses Diane tried to float after we got home. I knew what I saw. The tiny vial, the way she tilted it quick and secret like she'd done it before. The way her eyes darted to me and then back to the glass. People don't do that when they're seasoning a drink. They do that when they're testing how far they can go before someone notices. And now Marvin was the one who noticed, on accident. Sure, but that didn't make it any less real. I wanted to ask Erin questions, but what was I supposed to say? Hey honey, you think your mom might be trying to take me out of the picture? It sounds crazy out loud. Even crazier when the woman in question's been buying you Christmas socks for the past 8 years and calling you her second son in front of company. But those were just words. Easy things to throw around when you're already measuring someone for a goodbye. The next morning, I called in sick. Told the school I had a stomach bug and sat in the garage for an hour with the engine off and the garage door open, just breathing. I stared at my workbench, the one I'd built myself, every peg in place, tools lined up like soldiers. It calmed me. That's how I deal with chaos. I make order out of it. That's probably why teaching makes sense to me. You take a messy pile of teenagers and try to give them structure, even if it's only for 45 minutes a day. But this? There was no structure for this. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something deeper had been boiling for years. Diane didn't like me. Not in the obvious way people dislike each other. It was quieter, more insidious. The way she'd correct me when I told stories. The way she'd rewrap the gifts I gave Erin, as if my taste needed softening. The time she laughed a little too long when I mentioned I was applying for a department chair position. Oh, sweetheart, she'd said, her tone dipped in something sticky and false. You're good at what you do, but leadership takes a different kind of mind. She meant a man like Marvin. A numbers guy. A provider. A man who was now curled up on a bathroom floor thanks to the drink meant for me. That morning, I went back into the kitchen and stood in front of our fridge for 10 minutes, staring at a grocery list Erin had scribbled onto a magnet notepad. Eggs. Spinach. Half and half. It felt so normal it hurt. Like my life was still humming along on a track I hadn't chosen, while part of me had derailed without a sound. I needed proof. Not for the police. Not yet. For myself. Because if I was going to do what I was starting to think I might need to do, I had to be absolutely sure. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes with realizing you've been targeted by someone who still kisses your cheek at Christmas. It isn't loud. It doesn't cry. It just sits in your chest like a weight that gets heavier every time you breathe. That week, I didn't tell anyone. Not Aaron, not my brother, not even the counselor at school who always kept her office door cracked like she was inviting secrets. I just observed. It's funny how once your eyes open to something, you start seeing the trail that was always there. I started looking through old family photos on Aaron's Facebook. I hadn't realized until then how many of them I wasn't in. Birthdays, vacations, random Sunday dinners. There she was smiling between her parents, her brother, even the dog, and me. Sometimes off to the side, sometimes behind the camera, sometimes just gone altogether. Like I'd been photoshopped out of my own life. I remembered one 4th of July when I'd spent 3 hours setting up a grill in Diane and Marvin's backyard, only for Diane to tell everyone Owen had done it. Said it loud, like it was a fact, like she wasn't rewriting the memory while we were still living in it. Aaron laughed and corrected her, but Diane just smiled that thin smile of hers and said, "Well, you know what I meant." And everyone moved on. Everyone except me. That's when it started to dawn on me. This wasn't just about dislike. It wasn't even about disapproval. It was about erasure. Diane had been trying to chip me out of Aaron's life with a butter knife for years, pretending to be subtle, pretending it was all love. Until the sangria. Now it was different. Now it was quiet war. I did what any good teacher would do when faced with a mystery. I started taking notes. I wrote everything down. What I saw, what I suspected, the timing, her movements, even Marvin's symptoms, sweating, dizziness, vomiting, confusion. I looked them up. I didn't need to be a doctor to see what was obvious. It wasn't a stomach bug. It was something slipped, something small, something designed to sedate. Or maybe, make me seem unstable. That thought chilled me more than anything. What if she hadn't meant to knock me out cold? What if she just wanted me loopy enough to embarrass myself? To say something I couldn't take back? To make Aaron question who she'd married? And if that was true, what else had she been planning? That night, after Aaron went to sleep, I pulled the wine glass I'd taken from the dinner. Yes, I'd kept it, from the garage shelf where I'd stashed it behind a box of Christmas lights. The faintest ring still clung to the bottom. I wrapped it in a towel and placed it in a padded envelope. I knew a guy, Jason, used to be a chemist. Now ran a private testing lab out in Gallatin. We'd worked together on a photo essay about environmental toxins in local water systems. He owed me a favor. 2 days later, I mailed the glass with a note. No questions. Just run it. JM. I knew it would take time. I also knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I had that call. Because if I was right, this wasn't just manipulation. It was sabotage. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or just hang there, gray and heavy, daring you to make a move. I was at school, grading a stack of essays of mice and men, when my phone buzzed across the desk. Jason. I stared at the screen for a moment, heart thudding harder than it should have. I picked up, walked into the hallway, and answered in a low voice. Julian Mercer, Jason said, and I could hear it in his tone. This wasn't a casual call. You weren't paranoid. I leaned back against the cinder block wall, feeling the cold seep through my shirt. What was it? Benzodiazepines, he said. Small dose. Not lethal, but enough to scramble you good. Make you woozy, compliant. Might even cause memory gaps if you weren't careful. I squeezed my eyes shut. I already knew it. But hearing it out loud, it felt like stepping through a door you can't close again. Anything else? I asked, voice flat. Not that I could find, Jason said. But whatever it was meant to hit fast. 30 minutes, maybe less. I thanked him, told him I owed him one. Hung up. Then I just stood there in the hallway, staring at the same beige tile I'd walked across for years, like it suddenly didn't belong to the same world. Teachers drifted past me with coffee cups and lesson plans tucked under their arms, chatting about weekend plans. Normal life. And I was standing there with a file in my head that said, "Your mother-in-law drugged you." On purpose. I didn't even tell Erin when I got home that night. Couldn't. She greeted me at the door, kissed my cheek, asked if I wanted spaghetti or takeout for dinner. Like nothing had changed. And maybe for her, it hadn't. But for me, everything had shifted about an inch to the left, just enough that nothing lined up anymore. I went through the motions, dinner, dishes, TV on in the background, but all I could think about was Diane. About how easy it had been for her to look me in the eye while handing me that glass. About how she wasn't some criminal mastermind. She was just a woman who decided she didn't want me around anymore, and decided to act on it. The real question was, why now? Why not years ago, when I first married Aaron? Why after all this time? I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be the only one carrying the secret much longer. I used to think secrets were heavy things, big, black boulders you carried around until your back broke. But the older I get, the more I realize the dangerous ones are the quiet ones. The ones you barely notice until you're tangled up in them, breathless and stuck. That's what Diane had spun around all of us. Quiet secrets. And now that I knew to look, I couldn't stop seeing the cracks. The next Sunday, Aaron and I were supposed to go back to her parents for another dinner. "They're making brisket," she said brightly, standing at the kitchen counter slicing strawberries. "Dad's feeling better. Mom said he's even back to his morning walks." I nodded and made an excuse about needing to finish lesson plans. Aaron didn't argue, just kissed my forehead and said she'd bring me leftovers. If she noticed how stiff I was, she didn't say. When she left, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the blank pad of paper in front of me. Then I wrote 2 words at the top. Why now? Beneath it, I started listing every strange thing I could remember from the last few months. Marvin's sudden retirement, 3 years earlier than planned. The new investment project, he bragged about at Christmas, something about flipping real estate. Diane's vague comments about setting up a future for the family. Aaron getting weird phone calls she always stepped outside to answer. The way Diane had been pushing harder lately, suggesting Aaron and I should think about next steps. Bigger house. Babies. More responsibilities. The growing tension when I said we should wait, build up more savings first. Money. It always came back to money. The thought made my stomach knot. Maybe it wasn't just about disliking me. Maybe Diane didn't want me around because I was in the way. An obstacle between them and whatever plan they had cooked up. Maybe they figured if I was unreliable, a little loopy, a little unstable, Aaron would have no choice but to lean harder on them. Maybe they even thought they were helping her right into a different kind of cage. I spent the afternoon digging. Old emails. Financial records. Aaron's parents weren't exactly careful with their online lives. I still had access to the Wi-Fi from our last visit, and let's just say Marvin wasn't exactly a password wizard. It didn't take long to find what I wasn't supposed to see. An email chain. Diane, Marvin, and a man named Rick Sanford. A lawyer. The subject line was cold, clinical, durable power of attorney discussion. I clicked it open. Words blurred together at first, but one line hit me in the gut so hard I had to put my head down on the table. In the event of Julian Mercer's incapacitation, Aaron Sanford would assume full control of assets and decision-making for shared property. Sanford. Diane's maiden name. They had a plan. Not just for Aaron. For me. For what I had. For what they thought they could steer into their own hands. And the only thing standing in the way of it was me staying sharp enough to see it. It's a strange thing, realizing you've been cast as the villain in someone else's private play, especially when you didn't even know you were auditioning. But sitting there at my kitchen table, that email open like a smoking gun, I felt something sharper than betrayal. I felt clarity. They weren't just waiting for me to screw up. They were building the framework to shove me off a cliff and claim they tried everything to save me. And Aaron. I didn't know yet if she was in on it, or just the prize being passed around between hands pretending to mean well. Either way, I couldn't just sit still anymore. That night, after Aaron fell asleep on the couch, a half-finished glass of wine on the coffee table, I moved through the house the way a man moves through a burning building. Quick, quiet, focused. First step, protect myself. I gathered all the documents I could find, house deed, insurance papers, my will, even the student loan files still collecting dust in the bottom drawer. I packed them carefully into a messenger bag and slipped them into the trunk of my car. Next, I logged into every shared account we had, banking, investments, utilities, and changed the passwords. Not to shut Aaron out. Not yet. But to make sure if anything happened to me, it wouldn't be as simple as Diane making a phone call and waltzing into my life wearing a legal mask. Third, and maybe most importantly, I opened a separate savings account under just my name at a local credit union. Quiet. Out of town. No online banking alerts. I moved a chunk of money there. Enough to get by if I had to walk away with nothing but my wallet and my wits. As I sat there at the new account desk, the teller, an older woman with kind eyes, smiled and said, "Starting something new?" I smiled back, hollow and polite. Something like that. By the time I got home, Aaron was still out cold, the TV muttering softly to itself. I turned it off and sat on the edge of the couch, just watching her sleep. I used to think love was enough. I used to believe that if you worked hard, showed up, kept your promises, people would see that and stay loyal. But sometimes, people don't want loyalty. Sometimes they want leverage. And the worst part is realizing they started planning your downfall while you were still trying to build a life with them. That night, lying in bed next to Aaron's steady breathing, I made myself a quiet, gut-deep promise. I wasn't going to be the fool they expected. And if they wanted a game, fine. I'd play. But I'd play to win. The opportunity came faster than I expected. The following Friday, Diane invited us over for what she called a casual dinner. No fuss, no stress, just family. Aaron was excited, chatting about how nice it was that things seemed to be getting back to normal. I played along, nodding, smiling, even suggesting we bring a bottle of wine. But inside, I was sharpening my edges. I had no intention of walking into that house empty-handed. On the way over, I stopped at a UPS store under the excuse of needing to grab stamps. In reality, I mailed a certified letter to myself, copies of the emails I found, a full timeline of the sangria incident, and Jason's toxicology report tucked inside. Timestamped, postmarked, safe, proof in case someone tried to twist the story later. If they wanted to make me look unstable, they were going to have to work a whole lot harder. We pulled into Diane and Marvin's driveway just after 6. The house looked the same as always, perfect lawn, wreath on the door, little garden gnome by the porch steps grinning like he knew secrets. I stared at that stupid gnome for a second longer than necessary before Erin nudged me. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." Inside, the air smelled like roast chicken and lemon-scented candles. Diane came floating in from the kitchen, wearing an apron and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marvin was sitting stiffly in his armchair, a glass of something clear and suspiciously untouched resting on the side table. We exchanged pleasantries, the usual hollow greetings. Erin settled into a conversation with her dad about his recovery, and Diane motioned for me to join her in the kitchen. "You know," she said lightly, her back to me as she fussed with a tray of bread rolls, "I'm really glad you're feeling better." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Yeah, bounced back pretty quick." There was a pause. A flicker of something crossed her face, too fast to catch. She set the tray down and turned to face me, pressing her palms together like she was about to pray. "Julian," she said, "I hope you know how much we love you. Sometimes, misunderstandings happen. People get the wrong idea about things, especially when they're tired or under stress." There it was, the bait, the suggestion that maybe I was the problem all along. I smiled. Not the warm kind. The kind that says, "I see you now." "I agree," I said. "Misunderstandings are dangerous, especially when people start acting without thinking about the consequences." Her smile faltered just enough for me to see it. "I've been thinking a lot about family lately," I continued. "About protecting the people who really care about you. Making sure the wrong people don't take advantage when you're vulnerable." I let the words hang there, heavy and deliberate. She blinked, adjusted her bracelet. "Of course. That's what families do." "Good," I said softly, "because mistakes have a way of catching up with people, especially when there's evidence." Her hands stilled. Her face, normally so carefully composed, tightened into something brittle and strained. Erin called from the other room, asking if the rolls were ready. Diane swallowed, pasted her mask back on, and said too brightly, coming right up. But I saw it then. In her eyes. Fear. The first crack in her little empire of control. And I knew. She understood the game had changed. After that dinner, everything between Diane and me turned polite. Dangerously polite. It's a funny thing, when two people know a secret but keep pretending they don't. Every word becomes a weapon wrapped in silk. Every smile feels like a snarl under glass. Erin noticed, of course. She kept asking if I was okay, if I was stressed about work. I told her I was just tired. Just adjusting. I hated lying to her. I hated even more that I couldn't tell if she was lying to me, too. The next phase of my plan wasn't flashy. It was patient, methodical. I needed Diane to move first. Needed her to feel trapped enough to make a mistake. So, I let little hints drop. A mention of setting up new insurance policies. A casual comment about revisiting our wills. I started talking about traveling more, taking bigger risks with my career, maybe even investing in my own business. And I watched her ears perk up every time money came into the conversation. It didn't take long. 3 weeks later, Erin mentioned casually over dinner that her mom had been talking about helping us with future planning. Setting up trusts. Just to make sure everything's in order, she said, twirling spaghetti on her fork like it was any other Tuesday night. Mom said she could introduce us to her estate attorney. You know, make things easier down the line. Easier for who? I smiled. I played along. Sounds smart, I said. Let's hear what they have to say. Meanwhile, I was already 2 steps ahead. I set up an appointment with a lawyer of my own, someone neutral, far enough from Franklin that the Sanford name wouldn't carry any weight. Her name was Georgia Whitaker, and the second I met her, I knew I was in good hands. No nonsense. Sharp as a scalpel. She didn't blink when I laid everything out, the drug drink, the shady emails, the sudden interest in my future planning. This isn't about protecting assets, she said flatly, after flipping through my pile of evidence. This is about control. They're setting up to cut you out if they can, or make it look like you willingly handed everything over. I nodded. I already knew that. What do you want to do? She asked. I looked her in the eye and said, I want to make sure if they come after me again, they swing and miss so hard they take themselves down instead. She smiled. We can work with that. We set up my own power of attorney documents, my own trust, my own living will. Everything sealed, bulletproofed, and with clear language. If anything suspicious happened to me, everything would transfer not to Erin or her family, but to a charity foundation I'd chosen myself. It was a nuclear option, one I prayed I wouldn't have to use. But the thing about being the quiet man in the corner, the one everyone overlooks, when you finally move, no one's ready for it. Not even close. It happened the following Sunday. We were back at Diane and Marvin's house again, everything polished and curated, the way Diane always liked it. Erin floated through the evening in high spirits, completely at ease, while I sat there with the weight of the past few weeks pressing against my ribs. After dinner, Diane pulled me aside under the guise of needing a private word. I followed her down the hall to the study, my stomach a knot of tension I didn't bother trying to untangle anymore. The study was cold, smelled faintly of furniture polish and something sharper, almost metallic. On the desk sat a thick folder, too official looking to be innocent. Diane moved with a deliberate kind of excitement, her hands just a little too steady, her smile stretched just a little too wide. She pushed the folder toward me, practically vibrating with anticipation. Inside were a set of legal documents. Cleanly drafted, crisp. All I had to do was sign a few places, and I would be handing over full control of my life, financial, medical, personal, to Erin. Wrapped neatly in the language of care, but the real purpose was unmistakable. They were setting the stage to remove me quietly, under the pretense of love and concern. I sat there for a moment, flipping through the pages slowly, feeling every beat of my heart in my throat. This wasn't protection. This wasn't family looking out for each other. This was calculated. Planned. They weren't even hiding it anymore. Without a word, I closed the folder and slid it back across the desk toward Diane. There was a flicker in her expression then. A shift, so small most people would have missed it, but I was watching her too closely by now. A crack in the facade she wore like a second skin. She tried to recover, standing there with hands clasped too tightly in front of her, but the damage was done. She knew I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. I left the study without looking back. The living room was a picture of normalcy. Erin laughing at something Marvin said, the television playing quietly in the background. And yet, nothing was normal anymore. When we got home that night, I locked the door, checked every window, sat alone in the kitchen with a beer that went warm in my hand. I realized then that the battlefield had shifted. They could no longer move against me without risking exposure. They had lost the advantage. But the war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The morning after Diane tried to hand me my own leash wrapped in legal paper, I woke up before the sun. Erin was still asleep, curled on her side, breathing softly like the world hadn't shifted beneath our feet. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing against me like a held breath. I knew I couldn't keep holding it in. Not anymore. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table where, just a few weeks ago, I'd scribbled, "Why now?" on a blank pad. Everything had changed since then. And yet, nothing really had. The house still stood. The life Erin and I built still looked whole from the outside. But I knew better now. I knew how fast it could all be undone, not by violence, not by accident, but by design. When Erin came into the kitchen, the air was already tense, and she could feel it. I told her we needed to talk, not about the grocery list, or what to do with the spare room, or when to visit her parents again, but really talk. About her mother, about the drink, about the documents, about the control being drawn up behind closed doors while I was still pouring them wine and smiling like a fool. I laid it all out for her. No anger, just the truth. All of it. She didn't deny anything, but she didn't admit much either. Her face shifted through a dozen expressions: confusion, guilt, fear, maybe even betrayal of her own. Not because of what I was saying, but because I had kept it from her this long. Because in my silence, I had become a stranger to her, just like her mother had become one to me. There was no screaming, no crying, just a deep, wordless distance settling between us. Like we were standing at opposite ends of a frozen lake, both waiting to see who would fall through first. I told her I wasn't going to live in a world where I had to watch every sip of my drink. I told her that love, real love, doesn't require surveillance or escape plans. And I told her something else, something that came out quieter than I expected, that I didn't know if we could come back from this. Not entirely. Not unchanged. She didn't try to stop me when I packed a small bag that afternoon. I didn't take much, just enough to remind myself that I still had agency, still had boundaries, still had something left in me worth protecting. I left the house without slamming the door. I didn't know where I was going. A motel, maybe. A friend's couch. Just somewhere quiet. Somewhere I could sit with the truth and figure out what it meant now that it had been spoken. But I did know this. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to be erased. And I wasn't going to let anyone else write the ending to my story. Not Diane, not Marvin, not even Aaron. If they wanted a clean break, they were going to have to go through every shattered piece of what they tried to bury first.